We don't want war not for ourselves, we don't want war for them. And this has always been the big problem. Unfortunately, as we know, Hamas wants their people to be killed. We are the ones who are trying to protect them. You saw the amazing resilience of Israelis. You saw the way people dropped everything, ran down south, not knowing what was happening. And that's something that's incredible. What the Israeli military has done in Gaza is probably fight in the most complicated, complex terrain ever known in the history of warfare, and done it in the most humane way possible.
Yaakov Katz, thanks so much for joining us again.
Great to be with you.
And so let's dive right in. Your book is titled While Israel Slept. So what led to Israel waking up on October the 7th to the most horrific attack in our lifetime?
Well, Israel had been sleeping, I think, for about 35 years, from when Hamas was established as a terrorist organization until the moment that it exploded to some extent on our border with that invasion and assault of thousands of terrorists on the morning of October 7th. The sleep, though, had its different degrees, and it was a policy of, I call it a policy of containment that took years of being cultivated, incubated, until it officially became Israeli policy. But for the large part, Michael, think of it like this. If I told you today that the war will end, and it will end with Israel asking the Qataris to send every month $30 million in cash to Gaza, to Hamas, you would say, Yaakov, you should be institutionalized. That's crazy. But that's what Israel did for 5 years. So the question that we tried to answer in this book is, how did we, a country that is so vigilant, so aware of our military and security threats, how did we believe that that could work? How did we believe that that was possible? And I think that that's so important, because when we look at when and how and if the war ends, and we look at the challenges that we do face on the horizon, could this potentially happen again?
And do you come to a conclusion about that it could potentially happen again?
Personally, I think it could happen again. And I think it could happen again because at the foundation of what is Israel's strength and weakness at the same time is that we Israelis look at ourselves as being a Western country. Our trade is with the European Union and America. Our cultural relations are with the United States and Europe. Arts, Hollywood, media, you name it. We consume what comes out of the West. We're a liberal democracy, like the West. We're not part of the Eastern world. So Israelis think that they're Luxembourg, but they forget that their neighbors are not Belgium and France. Our neighbors are Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, until recently the Assad regime in Syria, and of course Iran behind the scenes pulling the strings. That is, on the one hand, a strength because it allows us to look forward, to always be innovating and creative, and not to let the conflicts bog us down and drag us down. Look at other places in the world. Look at Africa. Look out to the Eastern world. Their conflicts don't allow their countries to develop. But at the same time, we can't pretend that we don't have conflicts. We do. So that demands of us a different way of looking at things, and not to once again fall back into this policy of containment that we had with Hamas, and for some extent also with Hezbollah.
Your book opens with the young soldiers, female soldiers of the IDF who were charged with being the eyes and the ears, looking at what's going on in Gaza. Tell us what the warning signs were before October the 7th.
Well, those soldiers, for me at least, are the epitome of the failure, right? These were groups, what were called in Hebrew tatzpitaniot. They're the spotters or the surveillance soldiers. They would sit in bases along the border, and they would watch screens of what's happening in different areas of operation along the border. They had been warning for weeks, if not months, in the run-up to October 7th, that things were changing, that more senior Hamas commanders were out in the field, that there were drills that they had not seen before. And the joke was, I had someone I was a military correspondent for many years. I'd visited those bases, spent time with them, not with those exact soldiers, but with their predecessors. The joke was always, if there was a bee flying near the border, they would detect it. They had been issuing these warnings, and their commander said, no, you don't understand. Hamas is deterred. Hamas does not want conflict. Comes October 7th. The soldiers at Nahal Oz, which was one of the outposts along the border, 15 of them were murdered by Hamas. Another 6 were taken captive into Gaza. One of them was released in a miraculous operation just about a month into the war, but 5 more paid the price and spent about 500 days there. So you think about, on the one hand, They warned and were ignored. They were abandoned the day of October 7th, and they were abandoned for about 500 days in Gaza until they were finally brought home in a deal earlier this year. So it's the epitome of the failure. What was happening, though, not only in the run-up to October 7th, definitely in the months ahead, there were some signs. There were people like these soldiers. But even the night of, and we detail this in the book, of how there were alarm bells going off. Israel got intelligence that Hamas was preparing underground rocket launchers. Israel got intelligence that Hamas was preparing underground bunkers for its top commanders. Israel saw on different networks and systems that it has that Hamas was replacing its Palestinian SIM cards. About 100 Palestinian SIM cards suddenly were replaced with Israeli SIM cards, which would mean either suddenly 100 Israelis are in Gaza, that would not be good, or 100 Palestinians are planning to come into Israel and they want to be able to have continued communications capability. All of that's happening, and how is it looked at in Israel? It's a drill, or is it an attack? And if it is an attack, maybe it's a small-scale attack. All through the night was this debate at the highest level of the military and the Shin Bet, the intelligence agency responsible for Gaza, were these debates of what's happening. And it's easy for us to say now, I totally recognize that. But the way this was all analyzed, it wasn't a lack of information. And I'll borrow a line from Donald Rumsfeld, the late Secretary of Defense during George W. Bush's time. It wasn't for a lack of information, it was a lack of imagination. That's, I think, what Israel suffered from.
And so we've seen terrible terror attacks in the past. I'm thinking back to where you could pick so many, but for instance, the Dolphinarium terror attack where bombs went off at a nightclub. It's quite similar to the attack, let's say, on the Nova Festival, or the Fogel family who were murdered in their beds in Itamar, similar to what happened to all too many families in the South on that day. And of course, only Hamas or the terrorists are responsible for what happened. We're not for a minute suggesting otherwise, but isn't it just that not every attack is preventable?
Not every attack is preventable. And I think Israelis know that. There is no such thing as 100% defense. Even Iron Dome, which is an amazing system, has a success rate of about 90%. Nothing is ever going to be hermetic and 100%. With that said, when we looked at Gaza, our view of Gaza as a country, and I say we because the failure, I do genuinely believe, belongs to us all. It belongs to the political echelon and the military command and the intelligence agencies, and even to journalists like myself who were in those briefings and going to those meetings with these commanders and not asking maybe the right questions and not pushing enough to try to understand the discrepancy between what Hamas was saying and what our leaders in the military or in the government were saying. So I think we all own, to some extent, in varying degrees, the failures that led to October 7th. But even with that, what happened here was we believed in this policy of containment, and it had a few legs to it. One of those legs was technology. We mentioned Iron Dome. We believed that the rockets weren't really a threat because we could swat them out of the sky like a mosquito. They couldn't really do anything to us. So let them have rockets. It doesn't impact us. In 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, when they started to invade Israel through cross-border tunnels, as you remember, and started to tragically kill soldiers, we decided, okay, we'll deal with it. We'll dig an underground wall. We'll develop a system that can detect where they're digging a tunnel, when they're digging a tunnel, what tool they're using to dig a tunnel. We thought we were impenetrable. How many people crossed into Israel on October 7th in a tunnel? No one. They all came above ground. So the technology gave us a false sense of security. We also had other reasons. We had Iran, we had Hezbollah, we had bigger threats. So we thought, we have bigger fish to fry. Hamas, we can keep them low on the totem pole, because anyhow, they can't carry out an attack of this kind.
They were seen as a potentially weak enemy.
They were our weakest enemy. That's how we described them. And when, during the research for the book, Amir and I, we met with all the top commanders and the ministers and the members of the security cabinet. And whenever you would ask any of them, okay, what's the biggest surprise? Everyone was in shock that Hamas was able to do this. How could Hamas, that organization, was able to launch such an attack, so sophisticated, yet so old school at the same time, and then think of the bigger picture, drag us into a war that has lasted 2 years?
And so let's talk about what worked, what went right, if anything, on October 7th and the days afterwards. And then in general, what's your analysis of the war on all of its fronts since then?
Well, I think what we saw, definitely, it took time for Israel to regain its footing. It took time for the IDF to understand what was happening. This was because of the success of Hamas's attack, taking out communications, cameras, attacking those frontline bases and getting the commanders locked in their bases and in their command centers. They weren't able to coordinate. The Air Force was also unable to understand what was happening. And the commanders in Tel Aviv, like the chief of staff, didn't have eyes or ears on the ground. It took hours for that to be figured out. That's why the massacre was so bad. But you saw the amazing resilience of Israelis. You saw the way people dropped everything, ran down south, not knowing what was happening. People just took their sidearm. They didn't even know. They heard something was going, and they heeded that call, and they went in the hundreds. And that's something that's incredible when you think about the Israeli people. Within 24 to 36 hours, we had cleared out southern Israel. We had pushed them back. We had secured the border. And then it was starting to plan for the counteroffensive. What's coming next and what's Israel's response? When we look at the war and the way it's been fought or prosecuted over the last 2 years, highly controversial. You don't need me to tell you that. Sure. But what I do want to say, and I know this will also be controversial, is that what the Israeli military has done in Gaza is probably fight in the most complicated, complex terrain ever known in the history of warfare, not even modern warfare, of warfare in general, and done it in the most humane way possible. And I know that to many people that doesn't make sense, because Hamas says 60,000 people have been killed. Many of them, most of them, they'll tell us, are women, men, and children, innocent civilians. But when you look at how Gaza was created, when you look at how Hamas established its infrastructure, under every home, under every hospital, under every school, under every UN compound, that's where they put their launchers. That's where they put their bases. That's where they put their command and control centers. That's where their caches of rockets and weapons were stored. Hamas wanted Israel to kill innocent civilians. That's what it wanted. And every loss of life is a tragedy. But the question is about responsibility, Michael. It's on Hamas, in my opinion. I'll just say one more thing on that, because I think this is often lost. We're accused all the time nowadays of genocide, right? Now, it's absurd, in my opinion. It's a lie, it's malicious, it's a fabrication. We are the people, the Jewish people, we know genocide in our bones, right? We don't need people to tell us what genocide is. What's happening in Gaza is one of the farthest things, if not the farthest thing from a genocide, for a number of reasons. But let's just look at the straight up numbers, a dry analysis of the numbers, because the world likes to quote all the time the Gaza Health Ministry, which is in essence, and you know this is Hamas. No one around the world, and I come from 25 years in the media, would ever quote the ISIS Health Ministry or the Al-Qaeda Health Ministry. But for some reason, when it's the Hamas Health Ministry, people have no problems quoting it. But I say something simple. I'll take their number of about 62, 63,000, whatever it is right now, even though there's no reason I should believe them, but we recognize there are civilians who tragically, many, have been killed in this war. How many of them are combatants? So the Hamas Health Ministry doesn't tell you that. They don't distinguish between the bad guys and the good guys. Right. But if we believe the Hamas number, all I ask in return is let's believe the IDF number. And the IDF number, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said numerous times, we're talking about 20,000 people, combatants who have been killed in this war, if not more. Now again, it sounds dry and it sounds cold, but we have to look at the numbers. In every war, there's something called the combatant-civilian ratio. For every combatant, how many civilians are killed? If we take their number, and we take our number, we're looking at a 1 to 2, and in the worst case possible, 1 to 3. Now go to the United Nations and ask them, what is the average in conflict in the last 100 years? And you're looking at 1 to 6, if not 1 to 9. So instead of the world accusing Israel of genocide, you know what should be happening? People should be lining the streets and applauding the IDF. Now obviously that's not going to happen, but what Israel has done, dropping leaflets, making phone calls, fighting in a way that they do everything possible, really, to try to spare civilian life, even though Hamas wants us to kill the civilians, is remarkable what's happened in this war.
And in doing so, at the same time, they're fighting on so many different fronts as well. So in the last 2 years, we've seen the assault against Hezbollah, defanged, maybe down, maybe not out, but certainly down. The attacks on Iran and vice versa. Of course, the ongoing Houthi attacks. Is your analysis that Israel is safer after October 7th?
October 7th is a coin with two sides. One of those sides is the book, While Israel Slept. The failures, the policy decisions, the mistakes, tactical, strategic, that led up to that morning when 6/29 when Hamas launched its assault. But there's another side to the coin, and that is the re-engineering of the Middle East that we've seen over the last 2 years. Unequivocally speaking, Israel today is more safe and more secure than it was on the eve of October 7th, on October 6th, let's say, of 2023. Iran is on the defensive. Its nuclear enrichment processing facilities, Natanz, Fordow, Isfahan, destroyed, and at the worst, just set back a number of years. Hezbollah, defanged, decimated, and deterred today, and you have a government in Lebanon that is actively trying to disarm them and collect the weapons. Syria, Assad, not a direct result of our operations, but toppled, and the entire Syrian military. One of the stories that really is not spoken about enough in this war is how Israel, in the span of about 36 hours, destroyed the entire Syrian military. Really, maybe in one of the most brilliant aerial operations that we have ever seen, literally destroying everything. So when these Al-Qaeda guys, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, now led by Ahmad Ashar, took over Syria, they didn't really have an army. Israel took advantage, saved the world, not just Israel. And you have, of course, Hamas, which is degraded and a shadow of what it once was. When you look at the region, Israel today is safer. Now, the question, though, really comes down to, Michael, can Israel take advantage of these opportunities? There's an opportunity with Lebanon. We're talking about potential normalization one day with Syria. What's going to come next with Iran? There's now snapback sanctions. Is there going to be a new deal, a better deal than the terrible deal of 2015? And what will the day after look like in Gaza? So there's a lot of opportunity. Israel has helped create this opportunity. It's now up to our government to be able to take advantage of it and steer the country in the right way that we, our children, our grandchildren, will benefit from this new security reality.
What would you like the free world to take away from your book?
Well, I think everyone, I wrote the book because I felt a real sense of urgency. Amir and I, when October 7th happened, we were working on a different book already. And we had to pivot because that book was no longer relevant. And this story became the urgent one. How did something like this happen? So I think that we, first and foremost, people who care about Israel, us Israelis, have to study. And I don't venture to believe that our book is the commission of inquiry. I will still always call for a state-appointed commission of inquiry because we have to study and get to the bottom of what happened, what was made, what decisions were made in those closed-door rooms with the prime minister, with the chief of staff, get to the nitty-gritty so we can draw and derive the lessons to make sure it doesn't happen again. We had the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Then we fell asleep. 50 years later in 2023, we fell asleep. We can't have this again, not in 5, 10, or even 50 years. So I want people to walk away and understand that. But what I also want people to walk away and understand is that Israel was the one that was attacked in this war. Israel was the one who, why did we kick the can down the road, right? If you really think about it, what is it at the core of us that we know they're there? We know they want to kill us, and we say, you know what, take money. Let's bring in some workers. Because we don't want war. Right, because we don't want war. Because really, at the end of the day, we don't want war not for ourselves, we don't want war for them. And this has always been the big problem. If only they cared about themselves as much as Israel cared about them, this whole reality would be different. Unfortunately, as we know, Hamas wants their people to be killed. We are the ones who are trying to protect them.
Finally, was it cathartic or was it traumatic writing the book?
It was a mix of both. I mean, to be honest, writing this book, especially at the time, and you and I have had these discussions in the past, both of us had daughters who were in the Army on October 7th and during the last 2 years. And I drove, my daughter was in officer's training. She was home for that Shabbat and that holiday. And I was the one who drove her back to the bus that would take her back to base on that war. And she wasn't combat, but you know that you're sending your child back to war. And I remember my wife saying to me, does she have to go? And I don't blame her. I mean, it's just, you know your country's going to war. So it was, you're writing this while knowing that you literally, both Amir and I had children in the Army. How many of us, how many people do you personally know, do I personally know, who have been killed in this war, from our communities, from our families and friends? There's not a single Israeli, and I think people don't understand this around the world, there's not a single Israeli family that has not been touched or hurt, pained by this war. Either people they know who have been killed. Just in my family, we know kids who went to the same youth group as my children, husbands of teachers of my daughters, the rabbi from my son's school, 2 hostages we knew on day one from our community, one who had served in the military with my brother. And we're just one family. Every Israeli family has a story like that. So when you're also working on a book at a time that this is happening, it's very different. than writing positive stories like I've been writing until now. So it takes something out of you.
Well, the book is While Israel Slept. May you only be able to write positive stories in the future. May Israel never sleep again. May we learn these important lessons. Recommended reading and already a bestseller. So well done. And thanks so much for coming in once again. Great to have you.
Thank you, Michael.